Welcome back to the channel, everyone. This video is going to be another redo. Now, I'm going to kind of go over most of the stuff I talked about in my very first video, which was Auto Body 101. So there's some stuff in here that I want to explain a little bit better, maybe make the video a little bit easier to watch. The first thing I want to talk about is work hardening in metal. And if you've struggled trying to get dents out of cars and creases, and it's like the metal just doesn't want to do what you want it to, well, there's a reason behind that, and that's work hardening. And you need to understand what that does and how it affects the metal and what you need to do to kind of work around it and without causing any more hardness to the metal. Let me show you on the eraser board real quick. Okay, let's say this is just a cross section of a piece of sheet metal, and that metal inside is a structure, and it's all pretty uniform. Now let's take that same piece of metal and we're going to bend it. The piece of sheet metal has been in a collision. Now this structure that was all uniform is going to be altered. The inside of this radius, this metal is getting compressed right here, so that structure is getting squeezed together, and on the outside edge of this radius, the structure is actually getting pulled apart. That's where the work hardness comes from. This is compressed, this is stretched out, and when you go to try and straighten it, this grain to it, this structure, does not go back to how it was when it was new. And it makes the metal harder right in there. Let me show you another example. All right, I got a piece of coat hanger wire here, and I'm just going to take and bend this. Put a nice bend in there. Now, inside this radius, that metal is going to be compressed, and outside here it's stretched. Now, when I try and straighten this back out, this here is work hardened now, just from bending that and changing the structure, and that's going to fight me every step of the way to try and get this straight. And what happens, it'll just bend a little bit on each side of that kink, but it's always tougher. You can see it's just got that offset. You just can't get that out of there, and it'll bend on either side of it easier. But yeah, right where that kink was, it's tough to get it to straighten out again. And the same thing happens when you get a dent in a vehicle. You're trying to get a crease or a dent out and you're hammering on it and it just doesn't want to move. That's because of the work hardness in there. And even using a hammer and dolly when you're compressing that steel, it's going to put more work hardness in it. You have to understand how this work hardness affects the sheet metal when you go to straighten out your panel. Okay, I've got a fender sitting here. Let's take a look at that. Okay, on this fender here, I actually got two areas of damage. One in the rear, one in the front. On the rear one, impact was right in here. What happens is fender got hit right here. It caves this in, but it'll also put a buckle up above the top of it and a little bit down on here. And we're going to call that the eyebrow. The point of impact, which is going to be the direct damage, and then these crowns or eyebrows around it, that's the indirect damage. Okay, these spots didn't get hit from the inside out. They're actually raised up and buckled because of the impact on the center right here, which is the direct damage. Okay, let me show you on the front of the fender. It shows up a little bit better here. All right, it looks like the front of this fender is damaged from an impact on the very front of the car. Probably headlight core support. Headlight pushed this fender in and cause it to buckle here. It's also got this big eyebrow here. Okay, and this is going to be our direct damage where the headlight hit it. So this was all kinked from the impact. This area here is the indirect damage that was caused from this being caved in. The issue with dents like this, you have to try and get this part of the dent out at the same time you're relieving this. You don't want to just come in and hammer on this high spot here to knock it down without getting this dent out. But on the other hand, you have a hard time getting all of this dent out if you leave this here. So you have to work on them both kind of at the same time. Usually what you'll do, you'll come in here and you'll get most of this dent out, maybe 60% of it. You'll get it bumped up, roughed out. Then you have to come in here and relieve the stress in this thing. And with your dolly behind it, you'll hammer this down. You can't get this high spot out of it unless you have this dent mostly removed. This has to go somewhere and it needs to go back up into the dent. when this got buckled down, it forced that out. But it's kind of a double-edged sword because you can't get all this dent out if you've still got this in here. So you work on this most of the way, like I said, about 60%, get the dent out. Then you need to relieve some of the stress in here by hammering this down, then come back in. And where guys get in trouble with, if they just want to come in here and get it roughed out and then fill it without messing with this part right here, it's always going to be a high spot. You'll sand your Bondo down and you'll come to this and you'll have all that bare metal exposed. It'll be high. You'll try and hammer it down to get it where you want it, but it's going to fight you the whole way because it needs to go back up into here. And if you left this dent and you just wanted to fill it, this has got nowhere to go. And it's kind of a never-ending battle. So you need to work on both of these at the same time. You need to understand, like I said, the difference between a direct damage and indirect damage and repair them both at the same time. And also you need to know how one affects the other. And your Bondo work will be a lot easier once you learn to work both of these out at the same time. You can't leave this here and expect this to come out straight, and you can't expect this to come out straight if you've left that. So, and then getting back to the work hardening, this is going to be fairly stiff in here from getting bent, but for some reason, these eyebrows are always tougher to get out, and I don't know why that is. Even though they don't really get bent that much, usually this kink is less than where the main damage is, but they're always tough to get out. Okay, one last thing I want to talk about. In dealing with bent metal, whether it's a fender, a quarter panel, or a frame rail, it takes more pressure to straighten a panel out than it did to damage it. And I actually had this proven to me years ago. I was at the GM training center outside Chicago. We had a chassis on a frame rack, and it was, I believe, an old Silhouette minivan. This was like 1990 or 92, right in there. It's been a long time ago. And what we did, we took the 10-ton ram and put it between the pulling post and the end of the frame rail, and had a gauge on the foot pump, and we could push on that thing, and you could watch the gauge climb. And I don't remember what pressure it took, what it was at, but you could watch it building up pressure. That frame rail just buckled. It collapsed in and it kinked. So then we hooked the clamp to the front of the frame rail and we started pulling it out, and we were at the same pressure as it took to damage it, and none of the damage come out. We had to put a lot more pressure on it to pull it out, and I don't remember what the pressure was, but we went way over. And then we started hammering on those kinks to relieve the stress in them, and then it started to straighten out. So that kind of showed me what the work hardness does. You could see it right there. It was visual. You could see those kinks and how they locked up. But yeah, it does take more pressure to repair damage than it took to put it in. So it doesn't matter if it's a piece of sheet metal or a frame rail, any kind of metal. So anyway, I hope this video wasn't too confusing. It's just trying to explain how you have to work on this direct damage and indirect damage at the same time, how one affects the other. And if you don't understand those, give you a problem trying to get all of a dent out. And you wonder why it fights you sometime where it's not moving. It's the hardness that was put into the metal from the damage and then relieving the stress in the surrounding areas. That'll do it for this video. Thanks for watching.